Welcome, everybody. And here's what I'd love to know. If you can just think with me for a moment. I would love if you would just make some mental notes. I have some questions I want to ask you. And so the first one is, like, who here says that they know how to have a conversation? Just think about that. And now you might be wondering if you know how, because I'm asking the question. And then let's dig a little deeper into that. So have you ever experienced a time where you thought you were showing up to a conversation, but instead you got yelled at? Or you showed up thinking you were going to have a conversation, and instead everybody was multitasking on their phones or on another device? Or you showed up to have a conversation, and I think we all might be able to identify this, with where you spoke, one person really spoke the entire time, and you didn't have a voice in that conversation at all. I think George Bernard Shaw sums it up really well when he says the single biggest problem to communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Because a lot of times we think we are communicating when we are really doing something else entirely. So I want to look at what kinds of conversations we have, and look at metaphorically how the conversations can be broken down. And this comes from some work done by Bill Isaacs. And so the first one is to look at monologue. So monologue is that single voice. It's turn taking. It's I'll say everything I want to say, and then you can go. And it's a little bit like a download. The other one is debate, which is debate is like a beating down, it's advocacy, and there's a winner and a loser. So in debate, I'm holding strongly to a point of view, and then my job, and when I show up in debate, is to persuade, convince, cajole, bring you over to my point of view. In discussion, it means to break apart. So in discussion, it can feel a little bit like table tennis. So you're taking a topic and you're pulling it apart in different ways, and then it gets lobbed back and forth a bit. And then there is skillful conversation. So in skillful conversation, it's the first time where inquiry comes into the conversation. And it's a little bit like plowing a field. So we stick with something long enough to get underneath of a topic, to understand what's there. We are inquiring and asking questions of others. And then the last one is dialogue. And in dialogue, it's metaphorically like a pool of water. We're contributing to a pool of meaning, and everybody has equal voice. There aren't any particular sides. There's no known objective, and it's actually the idea and new thinking emerges from the conversation rather than somebody bringing new ideas into, or the idea, I guess I would say, into the conversation. So the reason I want to talk to you today about conversations is, and really the art and science of them, is that I believe that conversations are the single greatest predictor of success, whether we are or aren't having them. And if we can learn to be more intentional about how we invite conversation, how we cultivate, participate, and facilitate dialogue, I don't believe there is anything that any challenge, any initiative that an organization is taking on that they cannot skillfully navigate towards an effective outcome. Because the act of engaging in skillful conversation and dialogue is the key to collective intelligence and culture change. And that's really what I want to talk about today. There is an enormous amount of mindset work that needs to happen underneath of this to reap the full benefits, or even the capability to do it, to engage in that meaningful dialogue. And in fact, I work with organizations that typically spend 1 to 2 years really putting these concepts in play and practice, because they are a practice, in order to realize their full potential. But today, we're going to focus just on the nuts and bolts of the structures of conversations so that you can fully understand what dialogue is and how to start thinking about it differently. So dialogue is how we access collective intelligence, and we can't change culture without it. We can't change culture, we can't get to agility, we can't seek the big things in organizations, meaning these solutions that I would call like vexing issues, where we're looking for higher performance, Agility in business, we're looking to change culture, we're looking to be innovative, we're looking to anticipate what's coming in terms of change. The solutions to those emerge from dialogue, not from tools, processes, frameworks. It emerges from that collective pool of meaning. And as an executive coach who works with leaders and teams, and I go in to help those teams access their collective intelligence, I often observe things like meetings that run off topic or off the rails frequently, leaders who spend time talking at their teams in that sort of download method versus talking with their teams, or teams that would describe themselves as kind of being in breakdown, which is, and there often is one source, like there's this particular person that's causing our breakdown. Or there's disengaged team members. In other words, they've just kind of given up and really don't want to be involved in the collaboration. And even those teams that would describe themselves as kind of one big happy family, but they do that at the cost of getting any real work done. And so these patterns are very common. And at the same time, those teams will be working to solve these vexing, complex challenges that they're wanting to have an impact on. And yet the patterns in that conversation are the very things that inhibit their collective intelligence and gets in the way of them creating the change that they want to. So being able to engage in meaningful dialogue is that first step to change. The most important activity that leaders can be engaged in, especially in the context of agility, is to be creating the environment that supports more dialogue and less monologue and debate. And I have seen firsthand leadership teams create palpable culture shifts by just changing the very nature of their conversations, moving from more monologue to debate, moving from more monologue to dialogue. So the first step when we're aiming for dialogue is to understand how conversations work. And I think it's fascinating. Conversations actually have a structure to them, and the structure determines performance. So just like the structure of a riverbed would determine the flow of water, the structure of our conversations determines the performance and the outcome. And it's an indicator of whether we are more in monologue or dialogue. So every sentence that we say can be coded into one of 4 actions. And what makes conversations effective is that when we're all able to voice all 4 of these actions fluently in the conversation. And when we're able to do that, the nature of the conversation changes. So real quickly, I'm going to walk you through what the 4 actions are. So everything that we say, every sentence can be recorded as kind of a speech act. And so the first one is move. So move initiates a direction in a conversation. It puts forward a new idea. Follow supports or finishes. It gets behind an idea. Oppose challenges. It says, hold on. It pushes back and provides alternatives or corrections. And a bystand bridges ideas. It offers a morally neutral comment or a perspective or an inquiry. So move and oppose are vocal actions in the space of advocacy, and follow and bystand are vocal actions in the space of inquiry, and we need both. We need both advocacy and inquiry in order to be in a skillful conversation. So here's a really quick example. Let's look at an excerpt from a conversation. So I might say, let's meet for coffee next week. And someone else says, yep, next week is out for me. What about the following week? Sure, that works for me. Where would you like to go? Let's go to the coffee shop on the corner. So real quickly, let's look at the coding of that. So the first one is a move. It sets direction. The next one is the oppose. Next week is out. It won't work. The third one is move. So it makes a new move. What about the following week? Then a follow. Then a bystand. Where would you like to go? Morally neutral, no follow nor oppose. And then a new move, which is, let's go to the one on the corner. So I have a challenge for you. And I want you to be able to leave here today with 3 things. One is to be able to set an intention of whether you're going for monologue or dialogue. And then to be able to bring all 4 actions into the conversation, even if you're just observing yourself and your own actions in a conversation. And the third is to set an intention to cultivate space for dialogue. So That's a little bit about the 4 actions in conversation, and let's explore what a dialogic approach can get you versus a monologic one. Because engaging in dialogue comes from a belief that human beings create and refine and share knowledge through conversation. So to illustrate this need, I want to tell you a quick story. And it's a tale of 2 companies. And it's fascinating because I'm not making this up. And these 2 companies were experiencing these 2 events at a very similar time. And it was such a contrast in how they were approaching it. So company A and company B were both experiencing what I call a front page crisis. And this is where the executive team gets feedback from the organization via the media on the front page of the paper. And it induces high stakes. So it causes a great deal of disruption in the organization, as you can imagine. And then executives in both of these companies were feeling called out, blindsided. They did not know it was coming. And as often the case, one side of the story is played out in great drama over the media, and the other sides of the story remain untold. And also for the story to have made its way to the press, there is a great deal of frustration and a lack of feeling heard, not valued, and a belief that a moral crime has been committed by the executive team. And here's where the similarities of these stories end, because company A took action. They publicly took responsibility for what was happening and declined any further comment, noting that they were turning internally to listen. Company B also took action. They publicly defended their position and explained why the issue had happened. The executives in company A began to hold listening sessions in small groups across the company. Executives cleared their calendar. They prioritized listening sessions. They became the very #1 thing that executive team was doing. In company B, they hired a consultant, a mediator, and a legal team to draft new policies and procedures to fix the problem that they believed created the mess in the first place. And this might sound great, but it kept the organization stuck in the same dysfunctional patterns that had created their crisis in the first place. It was top down. In other words, the chances of them having another moment like this one were high. And company A continued their transformation, and their dialogic approach has shifted the nature of the culture and has changed their leadership team for the better. Their leadership team is still working on the outcomes of this story, but it's really promising, and the change that they are experiencing is real. It's in the bones real to the organization. Company B has returned to their old behaviors of monologue and protection, filling in their minds the roles expected of leaders. And yet both sides in company B, employees and executives, still feel greatly misunderstood and deflated. And they are moving forward with a very different energy and outcome than company A. So let's look at what happened here real quick. So the executives in company A are no different from you or me or company B for that matter, but they had something in place that was different. And that's a few key people that were trusted around them that pushed back and opposed their first instinct and encouraged them to start listening without answers or solutions, just to listen. And they did. The executives in company A listened. And it seems like the simplest thing in the world to do, right? But listening and asking questions are undervalued and underused because we have this story of what heroic leadership looks like, leading from the front, large, visible, making moves, setting direction, taking action, get something done. We can't delay. This is a crisis. And then we have this story about this sort of unhelpful version of leadership that looks passive, not leaderful, not knowing, listening. And that's the story that company B bought into. And the company, in company B, the executives had people around them who were offering suggestions. They were opposing, but the executives didn't see at all how prioritizing listening to the voices of staff sort of lower on the totem pole than them would help them align to the vision that they had for what they were supposed to be doing as leaders. Who knows? I mean, we'd have to ask them. It could have felt more safe, more natural, more in their comfort zone. But being in a comfort zone isn't what gets you out of the same repeatable behaviors. In company B's, leaders didn't want to be opposed, and they've set themselves up for a repeat crisis. And there is real value in opposition if we can make space for it. So we try very hard with tools, solutions, consultants, processes to spend our time persuading and influencing others to see our point of view. But what if the job of leaders was to hold conversations? And what if instead of focusing on the solution, we focused on creating the space for conversation? And what if we created a new mental model of leadership that's to design the conversation where we lead from the front and behind, and where both of those are both needed and helpful, and that the solution emerges from shared understanding? So I had a challenge for you, which was to be more intentional about choosing monologue or dialogue. And not everything needs a dialogue. So when we sail with my daughter, we're very clear about when we give an instruction under sail, it's to be followed. No conversation, it's not a space for dialogue. Really clear about that. The fire, the company is on fire or there's a fire in the building, it's not a space for dialogue. But the clarity is critical, and there are many places for dialogue. The second challenge is to be intentional about how you're using all 4 actions and to start being an observer in your conversation. So where can you bring more of a certain action when needed? And to cultivate the space for dialogue. Where will you seek to listen and understand? So dialogue starts with this ability to make this conscious choice in the moment. Like, what kind of leadership is needed from me in this moment? Will you stay in the breakdown? Oops. Am I back on?
Yes.
So
yes,
yeah, will you stay in the space of breakdown in order to create more thinking together, or will you choose to avoid it and turn away? So 4 guiding principles: stay in the breakdown, create space for opposition. If not, it goes underground where it does a lot more harm. To listen and inquire is greater than having an answer. To be authentic and vulnerable does not repel others, it draws them to you. And expecting people to speak their mind to a leader in this place of authority is unrealistic. So you have to ask, you have to inquire, and give people permission to create the space. Dialogue is the foundation to increasing agility. And in other words, dialogue is leadership. It's not about what happens. Things will happen. 2020 will happen. It is about how you choose to respond to it. And I believe it's a clarion call for not burying your head in the sand, but to cultivate true collective intelligence.